Shalom Chavrim, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. Glad to be back with you here on World Harvest Television Network. And again, don't forget to visit our website, IsraeliNewsLive.org. That appears throughout the broadcast here. Love to get your feedback as well. And of course, you can see our program daily if you watch it on YouTube or even just log on to IsraeliNewsLive.org. You can see our news broadcasts as well as prophetic insights there, and even the Noon Institute, where we do our biblical teachings there. Sure, it'd be a blessing to you. We are in a very powerful three-part series. Again, I encourage you, share it with everybody you possibly can. Let them know if they're watching it here on Saturday nights at 10 p.m., channel 367. Check it out. You're not going to want to miss this series here. It's very serious and it's very informative about what is happening in the Middle East. We were looking at this. We're looking at the wars that have been going on, and of course the conflicts, Syria in a so-called civil war. Now the threat of possibly Saudi Arabia and Israel going against Iran. Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that they would go into Syria and take out Iran on their own. Even Naftali Bennett, who's the education minister, but also part of the security group there in the Knesset there, also speaking about going at it alone in Israel or in Syria against Iran. And now the big issue about Lebanon. There's a lot of issues going on there. And we can't forget what General Wesley Clark talked about from the very beginning, back when he shared the insight that he had on the U.S. under the Bush administration, talking about taking out 7 nations in 5 years. Now, they've definitely been off course on the time, but they started off with Iraq. They went, of course, Syria. Then, of course, there's Somalia, Sudan. Sudan is now already in the uproar. We have Iran, Lebanon, Libya, all these countries here, and of course we've seen these things very much on track, exactly what General Wesley Clark ominously predicted would happen from what he was being told there at the Pentagon. So where are we at? What is this to do when it looks at prophecy? And the key to that prophecy, when it comes to what's happening in Syria, as I've been trying to warn, and not just warn the Israeli government, but as well as the Syrian government, as well as the Russian and American governments. You guys always look for spiritual, you have spiritual counselors to advise you on spiritual matters, and yet nobody has enough brains to recognize the most important spiritual situation is happening right now in Syria with Iran, Lebanon, Russia, the United States, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, and practically every other nation you can think of. Turkey. Turkey is involved inside of Syria. We have Britain, Germany, all of the forces that are there. The Norwegian special forces crossing over into the Syrian country from Iraq. We reported this on Israeli News Live. All these different fighting factions are there, and yet you don't even realize that you're fulfilling biblical prophecy. Remember last week we talked about Isaiah chapter 9, where Ephraim and Manasseh are fighting against each other. And of course, Manasseh being those of the Russian descendants of the house of Israel. Ephraim comprising not only of believers in Damascus, but also in Europe and in America. So the NATO faction is fighting against Russia. Ephraim and Manasseh, they're eating one another's arm. That's their strength. That's their power in the battle there. And of course, they both turn on Judah. And at the same time, Israel is turning on Syria. Not to say that Syria hasn't turned on Israel before President Bashar al-Assad was in power. His father in 1967 and in 1973 come against Israel. And yet totally forgetting the covenant that we made. And that's what we have right here. Let's pick back up. We talked about this at the end of the broadcast last week. Let's pick it up now and let's get into this here. Genesis chapter 31. Bereshit. Nun is the chapter here. If thou shalt, if thou shalt afflict my daughters, and if thou shalt take wives besides my daughters, no man between us, see, God is a witness betwixt me and thee. Laban prophesied, and nobody seems to realize that he prophesied. The covenant, though, rather, is in verse 51 and 52. And Laban said to Jacob, behold this heap, behold the pillar which I have set up betwixt me and thee. This heap be a witness, and the pillar be a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to thee, and that thou shalt not pass over this heap and this pillar unto me for harm. And neither nation has ever kept it. But let me tell you something though. Israel, do us good to realize this. When did it really begin to start happening? You know, Syria did cross over into Mount Gilead, where the pillar was set up. I agree with that. That was back during the times of Elijah. And Jehoshaphat and Ahab, the king of the house of Israel, and Jehoshaphat, the king of the house of Judah, Ahab comes to Jehoshaphat to get him to go with him to battle against Syria for crossing over that line. But our sins had brought us to that point. The sins and the idolatry of the house of Israel caused the Syrian army to cross that line. And that's what we tend to forget. You know? But you know, it's interesting. Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua, as we called him in Hebrew, or Yeshu, he knew. He didn't have that feeling towards the Syrians. He knew why. Because what did Laban prophesy? If you take any other daughters other than my daughters, Leah and Rachel, don't forget, as well as their nurses that were with them, they also became concubines to Jacob and bore children. All the 12 tribes come from them. But he said, if you take any other wives other than my wives, God judge you. And that's what happened. In fact, it was during the time of Ahab when he took another wife other than one of the daughters of Israel or one of the daughters of Syrian Laban's children, and brought idolatry into Israel. This is why Syria crossed over. God would use the Syrian army, not at the time when Ahab was king, because Ahab does repent and humble himself before the Lord. But later, God is going to come back and allow the Syrian army to scatter the house of Israel because of Israel's sins. Because why? They broke the covenant that Laban had prophesied about, and took other wives and brought idolatry into Israel. That was basically Laban saying, God judge, and God did judge. He judged very tough against the house of Israel for bringing that idolatry in. Now, as I said though, when Jesus was on the earth, when Yeshua came, we find out in Matthew chapter 4, we left off with this last week, verse 23 and 25. And his fame went throughout all Syria, and they brought unto him all sick people that were taken with divers diseases and torments, and those which were possessed with devils, and those which were lunatic, and those that had the palsy. And he healed them. And there followed him great multitudes of people from Galilee and from Decapolis and from Jerusalem and from Judea and from beyond the Jordan. This is why we ended up having such a huge Christian population in Syria. Why? They're your brothers and sisters. That's your father-in-law. And yet we're warring against them. The Christians today. That's why in Isaiah 17, when it talks about the fall of Damascus, God puts the blame on Israel as well. He says, why? You have forgotten the rock of your salvation. It's not a blessing that Damascus falls. According to Isaiah 17, when you read there about the second, third verse down, God says that the fortress of Ephraim shall cease because Damascus has fallen. And that is under the hand of Bashar al-Assad. People don't believe it, but it's true. Now, so let's back up and see what caused the trouble. Remember, Elijah was at the time of Ahab. Remember how also when Ahab sees Elijah, he says, oh, there's the guy that troubles Israel. And Elijah said, nay, you're the one troubling Israel. You broke that covenant. So we pick up right here. They're getting ready to go war against the Syrians because they're in Gilead. And of course, Gilead is divided up between, I believe it's Manasseh, Gad, and if I'm not mistaken, that's Reuben that were in that region there that was given to them by Moses through Joshua ben Nun. All right. So what does he say here? Chapter 22, 1 Kings. And the king of Israel said unto his servants, know ye that Ramoth Gilead is ours, and we are still and we are still. And take it not out of the hand of the king of Aram, or the king of Syria. And he said unto Jehoshaphat, Wilt thou go with me to battle to Ramoth Gilead? Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, I am as thou art. My people as thy people. My horses as thy horses. Just like President Trump and President Netanyahu say today. And it's true, they should be as one. All right? But you got to recognize your sin. And Israel today has done the same thing that Ahab did back all those thousands of years ago. We're going to get into that in a little bit. Going on to verse 5. Jehoshaphat said unto the king of Israel, Inquire, I pray thee, at the word of the Lord today. See? And then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together and 400 men and said unto them, Shall I go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I forbear? And they said, Go up, for the Lord will deliver it into the hand of the king. With you, where this whole issue comes up with breaking the covenant, before we continue on here, that is in Kings here, where we're looking at Jehoshaphat and Ahab and this whole idolatry situation. As I said, Ahab married Jezebel and brought idolatry into Israel. And that can be found easily in 1 Kings chapter 16, going down to verse 31. And it came to pass, if it had not been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ithbaal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. And he reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. And then you wonder why Syria crossed into Gilead. I mean, that was like a sign from God himself showing the house of Israel, you broke the covenant that Jacob and Laban had. And the prophecy that Laban said, if you take any other daughters, God be a judge between us. We forget about those things, don't we? Sure we do. But let's go ahead. I want to look very closely at what happens here, because we're watching modern history repeat itself in biblical prophecy. 1 Kings chapter 22, continuing on verse 5, And Jehoshaphat said unto the king of Israel, Inquire, I pray thee, at the word of the Lord today. Then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, about 400 men, and said unto them, Shall I go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I forbear? And they said, Go up, for the Lord will deliver it into the hand of the king. Right? But Jehoshaphat said, Is there not here besides a prophet of the Lord, that we might inquire of him? The king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, There is yet one man by whom we may inquire of the Lord, Micaiah, the son of Imlah, but I hate him, for he doth not prophesy good concerning me, but evil. And Jehoshaphat said, Let not the king say so. And Zedekiah the son of Chinah made him horns of iron, and said, Thus saith the Lord, with these shalt thou gore the Arameans until they be consumed. Syrians, in other words. And the prophets prophesied so, saying, Go up, Ramoth Gilead, and prosper, for the Lord will deliver it into the hand of the king. And the messenger that went and called Micaiah spoke unto him, saying, Behold, now the words of the prophets declare good unto the king with one mouth. Let thy word, I pray thee, be like the word of them that speak thou good. And Micah said, As the Lord liveth, what the Lord saith unto me, that will I speak. Unlike today. You know, we got all these prophets in the land today, all over the nation of America and in Israel as well, saying, God is with us. We've returned to our homeland. Go up. We'll defeat all the enemies of Israel today. Did you forget that when God prophesied of Israel returning to her homeland in the book of Micah, that the halt and the lame would return and we would be there forevermore? But the tower of Migdal, the leaders that would drag us into conflict, would be driven out of the city, cause us to go out of the city of Jerusalem because of their sins. Because why? They don't have no king in them. They don't recognize their counselor has perished. That's another message altogether. Anyway, let me continue on here though. And when he was come to the king said unto him, Micah, shall we go to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall we forbear? And he answered him, go up, prosper, the Lord will deliver it into the hand of the king. That's what people want today. You know, it's just somebody that kind of like, you know, I don't know, tickle your ears a little bit. And the king said unto him, how many times shall I adjure thee that thou speak unto me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord? And he said, I saw all Israel scattered upon the mountains as sheep that have no shepherd. And the Lord said, these have no, and the Lord said, these have no master, let them return every man to his house in peace. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, did I not tell you that he would not prophesy good concerning me, but evil? I'll tell you something, friends. There's a major push from so-called Christian leaders in Israel as well as Christian ministers in America that think that we can break the covenants of God and just attack our neighbors because Israel is in our homeland and we have a right to do so. That's not right. God has His Word, and God has a covenant that we have to go by, and a promise. And we made the covenant with Laban. Ahab broke it and married Jezebel and brought judgment on the house of Israel that caused us to be scattered to all the earth. Later, so does Rachel. Now, let's look at some of the news headlines about things like this. They're a little bit old, but just bear with me as we look at it. This is one that I thought was very interesting. The coroner. Deposing Assad could hurt Syrian Christians. That's an interesting article. In Syria now, Christians and other religious minorities, primarily Alawites and Druze, support Assad. Certainly, according to the conventional wisdom, polling data such as they are indicate that a majority of the total Syrian population, not just religious minorities, backs him in the civil war. Even the Sunnis will take Assad over the extremists. And Antoine Addo, the Chaldean Catholic Bishop of Aleppo, told reporters in Geneva last year he estimated that 80% of the Syrian Christians would vote for Assad in an election. Syria's bishop, both Catholic and Orthodox, are adamant in their defense in the secular regime, which they see as the only practical bulwark against the greater chaos of the establishment of Sunni regime that would be hostile toward to Christianity. That's in 2017, friends. And yet we want to believe all this propaganda. I heard one guy not long ago, Israeli guy, and that man's contacted me before, sitting there bashing Syria, saying that we support the true Syrians over there. Yeah, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra. And he said, we're supporting the opposition and convincing ministers across America that that's the right thing to do. That Bashar al-Assad is the evil enemy. You know, had we went in there and stood up with President Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian people, we wouldn't have had the slaughter of Christians. And you know, as that's being puppeted out there by the propaganda of, I don't know, Mossad or whoever it may be that's backing this man, as that's being puppeted across the United States and people are falling for this hook, line, and sinker, then if that's the case, why didn't you help rescue the Christians out of the country? Why weren't they brought in as refugees into the United States? Or is this only a propaganda to get the Americans, the Ephraimites, to support a war against Manasseh, the Russians that are there, and against Manasseh's own people that are there, and against Judah in the end? No, you don't look at the Word of God. And you're not taking into consideration God's promise and the covenant that we have made. Jeez, it's unreal. Another one. This was published on Our Hearts. Haaretz, Israeli newspaper, and a lot of people bash this guy big time in the article here, but he stood up for the Christian population in Syria. Anti-Assad, you are supporting the murder of Christians. Whoever fights Assad wants to remove Christianity from the Middle East, and the hands of those who support Saudi Arabia or Qatar are covered with the blood of the Coptic worshippers. This is an opinion piece that's written here on Haaretz. Let me read a little bit to you, though. Jews in Israel are supporting the murder of Coptic Christians and Christians in the Middle East in general, and not just killings that occurred in Egypt last Sunday. Anyone attacking Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is encouraging the murder of Christians in the Middle East and the entire world. It should be clear to all the atrocities committed by the Islamic State against the Yazdis and other non-Sunni Muslim minority it can get its murderous hands on will only be a prologue compared to what we should expect if Assad falls, which I hope never happens. Now, I have to tell you something. God bless the man for having the courage to say it. But it's not just the Israelis either. This is also the United States that is involved in this right now. And this is what's happening under even President Trump. As much as I see him trying to reach out to President Putin and kind of make peace, he's battling NATO members as well, European members, the EU people, and those from the Obama administration that are against Russia. And so again, Ephraim and Manasseh, they devour one another in the battles on the battlefield there, using each other. And that's why so many thousands of Christians have died inside of Syria. That's part of the house of Israel that went into captivity into Syria. As Isaiah chapter 17 so well puts it. Let's look at it and see. Isaiah chapter 17 verse 1. The burden of Damascus, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. The cities of Aurora are forsaken. They shall be for flocks, which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. Verse 3, the fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Aram shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Lord of hosts. And it shall come to pass in that day that the glory of Jacob shall be made thin, and the fatness of his flesh shall wax lean. Now the word Aram there, translate that to Syria, because that's what it is. Okay, so the remnant of Syria shall be as the glory of the children of Israel. Why? Because the fortress for Ephraim falls when Damascus falls. In other words, when they topple Bashar al-Assad, the rest of those Christians are going to be massacred. Why? Because the United States is being filled with a bunch of lies of a propaganda, failing to recognize the covenant that we made with Syria. Through Laban, through our forefather Jacob. You know, Jacob never crossed back over that pillar. Laban didn't cross back over that pillar that they set up. It was when Ahab went out there and lived in idolatry and married Jezebel and broke the prophecy that Laban had prophesied about. That's when this all happened. Now, let's go a little bit further. You don't believe that Israel doesn't have a part of it? That man accused Israel of being involved in this in the article on Haaretz. Well, let's look at Isaiah chapter 17 and go down especially to verse 10. But we're going to read verse 9 and 10 in Isaiah 17, the fall of Damascus, and God will show you why it happens. In that day shall his strong cities be as forsaken places, and were forsaken from before the children of Israel. After the manner of the woods and the lofty forests, it shall be a desolation. For what? For why? For thou hast forgotten the God of thy salvation. Thou hast not been mindful of the rock of thy stronghold. Therefore thou didst plant plants of pleasantness, and didst set with slips of a stranger. That's prostitution in the Hebrew language. Why? Because you took in and you married Jezebel in modern days and brought idolatry right back into Israel all over again. Verse 11, in the day of the planting thou didst make it to grow. In the morning thou didst make thy seed to blossom, a heap of boughs in the day of grief and desperate pain. Ah, the uproar of many peoples that roar like a roaring of the seas, and the rushing of nations that rush like the rushing of mighty waters. I mean, that sounds like Daniel's prophecy over there, where they come over there. It's not the king of the north and the king of the south, or the king of the Hanegiv, which is an Israeli king, and the king of the north, Melech HaTzifon, which is a hidden king. Who knows who that hidden king really is, but they don't work against each other. It's imo, with one another, and they come over like a storm Kind of like what you read right here in Isaiah 17. I think the prophecies overlap each other. They come up uproar of many peoples that roar like roaring of seas and rushing of nations that rush like the rushing of mighty waters. You're seeing the prophecies overlap, friends. We're almost out of time here. All right, go to 1 Kings chapter 20. And Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, or the king of Syria, gathered all his hosts together, and there were 32 kings with him, and horses and chariots, and he went up and besieged Samaria and fought against it. And he sent messengers to Laban, king of Israel, into the city. Listen to this carefully. And he said unto him, Thus saith Ben-Hadad, Thy silver and thy gold is mine, thy wives also, thy children, even the goodliest are mine. And the king of Israel answered and said, It is according to thy saying, my lord, O king. I am thine, and all that I have. He's echoing the exact same words of Laban. And idolatry is what brought it on us. And here's what's interesting. You remember, though, how we read in there already when Jehoshaphat asked him, Do you have another prophet? And Ahab says, We got 400. Today, you got thousands of ministers that are standing there and saying, We'll stand with Israel, go fight and kill all the enemy, and not looking at the Word of God and what God said to do. This is what's getting us in trouble. Look at it again, Genesis 31. And Laban answered and said unto him, said unto Jacob, The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and thou seest, all that thou seest is mine. What does the king of Syria say? In 1 Kings 20, and said unto him, Thus saith Ben-Hadad, Thy silver and thy gold is mine, thy wives and thy children, even the goodliest are mine. It's only a repeat of history, friends. Drop to Genesis 31, 48. And Laban said, The heap which was a witness between me and you this day, therefore was the name of it called Gilead and Mizpah. For he said, The Lord which watch between me and thee when we are absent from one another. If thou shalt afflict my daughters, if thou shalt take wives besides my daughters, no man being with us, see, God is a witness between me and you. And then jumping over to 1 Kings chapter 16, And it came to pass, as it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, he took the wife of Jezebel, the daughter of Ithbaal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. That's where the sin began. Now, let's look at the modern day sin. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. This is the end of part 2. Next week, part 3. You don't want to miss the modern sins of today.